Rustacean Station. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today I'm with Auri, who is a software developer. Auri, welcome. You mind to introduce yourself to the audience?
I'm Auri, and I'm a platforms engineer at Chorus One. But in Rust side, I develop things that are, you could say, very ambitious, but also incredibly useless. So one of the projects I'm working on is called Memflow, and it's basically a forensics tool that analyzes memory from virtual machines and physical machines. It's set up in this very pluggable way so that it doesn't really matter what you're working on. It's all abstracted away with a nice API. And on top of that, you plug these plugins together, which are dynamically loaded, and they allow you to analyze virtual machines, physical machines, Linux operating systems, Windows operating systems, and so on. And it's a pretty big project that led me through the rabbit hole of building FFIs and then building a code generator and then digging into, okay, what do we need for making the whole process of making loadable plugins easier in Rust?
Okay, yeah, I see your project over here. It looks pretty interesting. Let's see. What kind of things can you do with Memflow exactly? Like, what kind of practical use cases would you use it for?
So, one of Memflow's use cases is analyzing machines during forensics, like, oh, what files were open, what programs are open, seeing it's not implemented, but potentially seeing network traffic, etc. You can also do live manipulations of memory. You can, for instance, dump keystrokes from a machine. And to be fair, like it's quite often used in cheating, but I don't like that too much. Yeah, like anything that touches a system, it can be used for. And one of the things we're kind of going towards is monitoring for malware from outside the system. And that's where having an outside observer helps a lot because then malware cannot possibly detect any antivirus running on the system. So that's kind of where we're going towards with the project.
So you mean that you can use this to see malware within the memory or what it's
Y-
doing or if it's observing memory?
Yeah, malware within the memory. There are like some low level trickery that malware can do
Mm.
to hide itself from the operating system. But if you're an outside observer, you can find it by
Hmm.
checking the page tables of the processes.
Okay, interesting. I know you told me that you're not a like software developer full time at your work, but you seem to know a lot more about computers than I do. Maybe that's from your current job is what you're doing. I'm not gonna say what you're doing, up to you to say it, but maybe it's related. I don't know, but I feel a little bit sad. I don't know as much as you about this kind of stuff since I'm programming and dealing with memory sometimes. So, but it's pretty cool, like what this is doing.
Thanks.
I wish I
Yeah.
had the time to look more into it. Go
I
ahead.
mean, the secret for it is to be very young and start very young. My background comes from video game development. So it was like low level network systems and making them secure, etc. Then I also got a little bit into game hacking to see from the other angle how things work. And it was really interesting to reverse engineer games. And it gave me a really different point of view of what a program is, which helped me later along the way with learning Rust because it's also like a relatively low level language, even though I think it has pretty a lot of high level abstractions.
Oh, that's interesting. I mean, I just got myself a Switch. I've been playing video games as much as I can recently. I think it's probably a really bad habit, but at the same time, I find that I'm actually able to socialize with other people around me for once. Before I never play video games, I'm always working. And then now I got a Switch. Now I'm playing more games and I'm able to actually associate with other people because everybody else around me is playing games. So, but yeah, and actually I've been looking at maybe trying to make a game. Like, how did you start making games? What were you using? Because actually, I see that C# seems to be the main programming game language for most video games these days. Like, I think because you have Unity, etc. Right?
Yeah, I actually started with Unity, and at the time, I used Unity script, which is like JavaScript but statically compiled to .NET. And yeah, I then moved to C sharp. But yeah, it was these languages with runtimes. And the way I got into it, honestly, it was just going in and doing it. Like, it's super simple to say, but it's also very hard to actually go ahead and do it because I had absolutely no clue where to start. Searched on YouTube Unity tutorial after having figured out that, oh, Unity seems like a tool that could work for me. And I picked the first tutorial I could find. It wasn't the best one, but it worked. I followed it through, repeated it several times, and then I just like drifted off to the side doing my own thing.
So did you actually ever take a look at, is it Boo, I think? Have you heard of that one before?
I heard about Boo. It's like Python like,
Yeah, exactly.
but
Yeah, you didn't try to learn that one, did you?
I luckily I didn't try because they cut it off pretty quick.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious why they did because like I can imagine that you can get a lot of people because so many people learn Python and they love Python and then it's a good way to rope them in. But yeah, like you said, they did support it and they're like, come on guys, you can use Boo. So if you use Python, you can and then like first of all, the name is terrible. So maybe that's part of the reason why they had to kill it. Second of all, yeah, it never really caught on. Maybe it was because of the name. I don't know. But I think they always said that like you can do more with C sharp. So I think the hardcore people who really wanted to learn Unity always went to C sharp because, like, everything else was like 'cause it was like 3 languages, right? I think you must have known when I was kinda looking at it a long time ago. It was like Boo, like you said, the script, Unity script, I think,
Unity script.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is a JavaScript-like one, right? And then there was,
Yeah.
C sharp. And so C sharp and
Yeah.
JavaScript are already so similar, so it's like, why not just go C sharp?
Yeah, like I mean everything that compiled down to like a .NET library.
Yeah,
So
mono.
there was no actual difference between the languages other than syntax, and I suppose Boo was more constrained. And also another thing is with Unity script, there wasn't a clear documentation how to do inheritance. I had to figure that out very painfully when the new networking system was released because nobody did use Unity script anymore. I was like the only one left. But then
Yeah.
they decided to drop it, and I was like, okay, I need to port everything. And that was a bit painful. But then I became a C sharp guy.
Yeah, but C sharp is a pretty decent language, like, I've heard a lot of good things about it, I just haven't had time to play around with it. Like, it started off being a clone of
Yeah,
Java, but then now it's its own thing, and they have a lot of I haven't heard people talk bad about C sharp. More so people are saying like, "Well, it's misunderstood because it's not just like Java, now it has its own flavor." Sure, it shares maybe 80% or something with Java, but in the end, like, it's got a lot of things built onto it that makes it really unique.
I mean, I've touched Link very briefly, so like I don't think I've used C sharp to its fullest, but it is actually a pretty pleasant language to work with. I can totally agree with that. There are like quirks, especially when it comes to performance. Oh, it's much better to define a global variable outside the function before instead of defining a local variable because that's supposedly faster. But I don't know, like, other than that,
S
it's
sounds more
uh,
dangerous though, rather than
yeah,
defining
but
it within.
those were the common advices from Unity people how to optimize your code. Just put it in the
Okay.
global scope. Use it locally, but put it in the global scope.
It makes sense, but it does sound like bad programming. I understand that, like, when you program games, right, my understanding is that you wanna be as fast as possible to give the best experience, and so you
Yeah,
may not
totally.
do the most, correct academic, like, kinda code, but your code will run fast, and it really depends, and also, it's like, okay, if I write this kinda code works great on, like, x86, and this one maybe works best on ARM, and they do the same thing, but maybe slightly different change around or whatever due to the compiler, I think. So that's also, like, very interesting, but I think less of that nowadays. Usually, it's the compiler can usually optimize, I think, most of this stuff for you. You don't need to worry about
Yeah,
rewriting something to be faster for a specific architecture.
I trust LLVM probably way too much. I trusted
Well,
it to auto-vectorize my loops in C++, and it worked really well, but I'm really happy, like, how far the compilers have gone. I mean, when I started, they were already really good, but still, it's absolutely insane, and I'm like really. That's something that's been on off the top of my head. How do they actually work under the hood? Like, how do you build like this super optimizing compiler from scratch? Yeah,
well, it's been years in the making, right? It's
yeah,
not like started last week, it's just years to do this stuff.
yeah. But can we rewrite it in Rust?
Maybe. I mean, I guess it's possible. I don't know what's it's written in some assembly and some C, right? I think I'm not too sure what it's written in LLVM.
LLVM is C++ 14, I
Okay,
think, or 17.
all of it. There's no assembly. There should be some assembly, I would think. Or you don't know, maybe.
I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, I guess you could rewrite in Rust, but I'm not too sure if you really want to. There's a lot of stuff in there. But this kind of leads us on to the topic of, if you were to start bringing Rust into LLVM, I think this ABI, would that matter, right? So we're here to talk about your article. Your article is called "We Need Type Information, Not Stable ABI," right? Do you mind to give a quick summary about what is it that this actually means?
Yeah, so basically, the article went into how to actually link multiple libraries together and have them call functions from one another. What is needed for that? And there's like a recent Rust proposal for interoperable ABI, which I think is really good, but I think it wouldn't solve the core problem of ensuring safety across dynamically linked libraries, because just because you have an ABI doesn't mean you know automatically that your libraries are compatible with each other. So I proposed that, okay, one of the most important things needed to build safety solutions, and they don't have to be built in the compiler, but this one thing needs to be built in the compiler for it to work the best, is type information. It's basically querying, okay, you have a type T and you want to query, is it a structure? Is it a pointer? Is it a tuple? What fields are in there? And have this type layout representation of what's inside the structure. And the reason I think this is really important is because I looked at other tools and I've worked on my own code generator. And for ensuring safety, there needs to be some sort of representation of types. And many tools end up building their own solutions, their own subsets of it. And there is quite a lot of fragmentation, and you can't really import third party libraries and use their types across FFI, because now you have to somehow manually implement type layout for those types. But the only way to implement them is within the core crate providing type information. And that's obviously not feasible. So basically, yeah, add this little thing into the compiler and let everyone play with it.
The little thing, if I understand correctly, is this repr interrupt, right? You're talking about the interoperable ABI? Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, no, not repr interrupt. Repr interrupt would be useful, but that's a different side of the coin. The little thing would be type information, which is not very little. It could be, I don't know. So, like, there are some core intrinsics in the standard library. There's one for type ID, there's one for type name. You could have one for type information, and it gives you a structure describing the type. And I looked briefly into the compiler, how those intrinsics are implemented, and I thought, okay, this seems like something that could be done. Of course, it's not just a single number or single string, so it could be a bit trickier to implement, but yeah, something like that.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand how this would work, right? You add it to the compiler, but this is about applications talking to each other, right?
Yes.
Because what I understand with ABI, like, isn't it that you can take one like C program and talk to a Rust program and somehow use the Rust types? Is that similar or no? Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah, so I guess we could start from like what ABI is.
Yes, please. As we talked before that, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have a very perfect definition of it, but
Hmm.
ABI is application binary interface, and it's how a program calls functions at a very, very low level, i.e., instruction level. And there are two sides of an ABI actually. There is one which describes how structures are laid out. So, for instance, in Rust, you have the default representation and C representation. C one is compatible with C language, and Rust's representation is not very well defined. It sorts the fields to compact the size, but you don't really know how it works. And those two representations are incompatible. On the other side, you have calling conventions. How are functions called? Which means, okay, say I have an integer to pass. Do I pass it on the stack? Do I pass it as a register? Okay, integers are easy, but say I have a structure to pass, which has 10 integers. How do I pass that? Do I write it to the
Hmm.
stack? Do I try to pass half of the structure as registers and the other as a stack? Or do I take a pointer, an address to the structure and pass that? And it's like, oh, implied ownership transfer.
But the tricky part of that is you have to know what kind of structure you have, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you need to know what structure you have. But as far as calling conventions are concerned, they don't really care how, like, about whether it's a Rust structure or a C structure. The way I understand it, it's really just a byte slice with specific alignment, and it needs to be passed from one place to another.
Okay. And it's up to the other it's up to, like, the other side who's receiving it to actually know how to deal with that, right? It's just memory or data being passed around, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because to me, like, I'm thinking about like a map or a hash map or hash set or whatever you want. Every language has its own name, you know? Each one, like, when you do the keys, right? When you calculate the hash the keys, there's so many different algorithms, right? I'm always like, how can you pass, like, a Ruby hash to, one in Rust? I think they have different, ways of calculating that hash to find the right thing inside the map, so, yeah, that part wouldn't make sense to me, but that's not part of this ABI, right? That's just an implementation of it. Like you said,
Yeah,
it's just
that's
like,
just.
okay, I have this data, I need to pass it to this program. How should I pass it? Like you said, do I need to put it on the stack, the register? Do you want all the data, like you said, or do you want
Mm,
what do you call that, a pointer to it, right?
yeah.
And I think most people want a pointer to it because I find a lot of people who want to do this kind of passing, they always want it the pointer because they say, oh no, copying the data is too expensive. That's going to cost like milliseconds. We don't got time for that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what C++ does with non primitive structures. Meanwhile, C, if you pass by value, it puts the whole structure on stack or like part in registers. I don't exactly remember how it is. But like that was one of the things I got really confused by is when I was working on my code generator and was testing C side, okay, this works, but now I add a destructor to automatically clean up things and it doesn't work anymore. Why doesn't it work anymore? But it turns out that ABI between C and C++, it subtly changes once you add a destructor, which is pretty insane if you ask me.
Well, I think destructors are only in C++, right? They're not in C
Yeah,
because you don't
yeah,
have
they are only in
objects.
C++,
Okay.
but something about, I guess, in C++ standard, which is pretty massive, they say, okay, if there is a destructor, it's no longer a primitive type and it can be passed differently.
But with C++, isn't there different standards? So does that actually change between standards or no?
Oh yeah, I don't exactly remember when it happened, but there was a ABI breaking change. Was it C++11? I think it was 11 when they changed the ABI, and now C++ has two incompatible ABIs, which are like roughly similar, but I think in some cases they're not the same. And that's a lot of trouble for the language, for the libraries. And that's one of the things Rust doesn't want to do is stabilizing the Rust ABI because what if we need to change it? We don't want to end up with two different ABIs and we don't want to maintain two ABIs. So it's like a really delicate subject with tons of details that need to be taken care of.
Yeah, because I hear a lot of people talking about ABIs for Rust, and it's something people complain that we don't have. And obviously, you've seen this before. And yeah, I think that's kind of one of the could be good, could be bad, depends on how you see it, right? Where, Rust wants things to be stable for a long time, basically no breaking changes. But at the same time, that's really painful, as you know. And so that's why like nobody wants to take that first step and say, okay, here's a V1 of the ABI, right? Because you want to be able to write
Yeah.
something because I think that's what they claim, right? Write this once in Rust and it'll be running for forever until version 2. And basically there's no version 2. Theoretically, there's gonna be no version 2 is what they say.
Yeah. And that's sort of what people were complaining about ABI, and that's sort of what interop representation could partially solve. Basically, there are some parts of Rust which could be defined in stable way. Say you have a slice. Underneath it is a pointer and a size describing its length. Same with str. With a trait, you have pointer to data and pointer to vtable, which basically represents the functions of a trait that you call dispatch dynamically. And those things, those are so-called fat pointers, and that's one of the things repro Rust could solve, is like specify them. Okay, this is how they're passed. And that would benefit a lot, because currently the official consensus is you don't know how they're laid out. You're not supposed to rely on them, yet people still rely on them. And there was like one case, I think like sometime this year, I mean last year, they changed up their representation of traits a little bit and it broke the libraries. And to be fair,
Mm.
actually, it's not a very common change. I think the older representation was the same as Rust 1.20 for the most part. I tried it out once, but then there was a period half a year ago when it changed 2 releases in a row. And basically, that's the freedom compiler developers have, and they should have, to improve the layout, because I checked the layouts in like a reverse engineering tool and I noticed that the old representation had some null pointers at the start and there were gaps and there were composite traits. Meanwhile, a new one was way more compact, which I think is better. So fat pointers is one of the things. Another thing that I think is pretty important is zero-sized types. So if you put a zero-sized type, like a void, inside a structure and mark the structure as a C structure, the compiler, if I remember correctly, will yell at you and say, I mean, it will throw a warning saying, oh, this is not FFI compatible type. The reason is because C ABI does not permit zero-sized types. Void is 1 byte sized. I mean, at least on x86 Linux, which is for a good reason. At the time, there was no strong type system, and there was absolutely no need to have shared memory addresses. But Rust is a more complex language with a very powerful type system where having zero-size types makes a lot of sense in structure. Not from the binary perspective, but from type system perspective, traits and so on. So that's another thing that interoperable ABI could solve. Yeah, I think those are the two main ones. Then there are some, okay, how do you pass results in and out? Because on C, it's typical to have an integer result and on success write to a pointer. Could we do that in Rust? How do we pass options? Like there are like way more details to hash out, but I think those are like more of the things that could be built on top. But from layouts and calling conventions, I think fat pointers and zero-size types are the most important.
Ah, yes, fat pointers. I believe a fat pointer is something to do about the address size. Is that right? Forgot why the heck they call it a fat pointer now.
Address size is the same, but the pointer itself is the size of 2 pointers because it has both the address to the data and some additional metadata, say a
Okay.
slice length.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know. I know I was doing some FFI for a project and I had to pass around like a memory or pass around, sorry, like an array of data. And yeah, I had to basically pass 2 pieces of data, the size and the memory address of the start of the list.
Hmm.
And I already knew what kind
Yeah.
of data it was already, so I didn't need to worry about the size because it was already compatible. Like the ints and everything were already there, so it was not a big deal. So like, it knew where in memory, etc. So I don't think I need to
Hmm.
explain to you. You know all about memory. You're the memory king in comparison with me. So
Okay, thank you. How much FFI have you written?
I don't know how do you judge that? Like lines of code or what? How would you judge FFI?
Uh, like,
How much FFI have you written?
yeah, no, I guess like one point I wanted to bring up is, actually don't know. Uh, how do you judge it? Because
Well, I can say this much, right? Like, I actually put some FFI into production. So I was using Elixir to, I think I talked so many times about this project. I was using Elixir to parse XML data and create PHP files. Weird, but yeah, somebody paid me to do that. And when you parse XML data with Elixir, it's not so resource friendly as like Rust or C is. It takes a while because it's a garbage collected language to let everything down. Basically, I was like had like 4 GB of RAM, and so I replaced one of the parsings of XML with that with Rust FFI and using this project called Rustler, and it worked fantastic. Right, basically the memory stayed into like the tens, or sorry, I think it went up to maybe between 40 to 80 megabytes instead of 4 GB of 40 to 80 megabytes of RAM versus, of course, 4 GB of RAM. 10 minutes down to 10 seconds in total, whereas before it was like 10 minutes just for the processing, at least. So, yeah, like, and that was it basically passing quite some complex data, like a list of strings and so forth, and parsing that and sending back actual structs of data. So it was
Mm.
quite complicated. The nice part is that it actually handled most of the FFI, this Rustler project. So I didn't need to worry too much about passing stuff back. Like I could just return something, and then they have some magic that could translate that back to Elixir for me using this process called a NIF, native implemented function, which is what I was writing. So
Mm.
yeah, you're looking around a little bit confused, but I'm trying to let you know, hey, I've done a little bit of FFI in my day,
Yeah, no, no,
quite
no.
some complex stuff.
That's really cool. I've never actually heard of Rustler, so that's new for me.
Yeah, we've heard of Elixir Erlang, right?
Yeah, I've.
Yeah, Rustler is a really cool library. I'll pass it over to you so you can take a look. It's a fantastic library. Like I haven't looked at it and played with it in a while, but honestly, it was a breeze to use, and I was quite happy with it. And it looks like it's still being worked on. Yeah, last week they had a new release, so it's fantastic. It's still being worked on. If you like,
Mm.
they do have like well, Erlang, which Elixir has now, is going to be. They already have this like what do you call that? A JIT in there. So most of the
Mm.
stuff will be. You get like 10 to 20x, I think, speed out of it now, something like that. But still, I think you
Huh.
can't beat Rust speed,
Yeah,
especially out of the box, right?
yeah,
Because JITs need
exactly.
to warm up, right? This is a NIF, so this is like an implemented like native function, so it should be much faster anyways.
Mm. I mean, looking at it, it adds an attribute and it magically wraps it in
Yeah,
some way.
yeah, they got some kind of magic, which yeah, I talked a little bit on a previous episode, I think, with Carl Lurch, and I was like, I don't know, I'm on the fence. Like I like how easy it is to add, and but the thing I don't like is I'm not sure exactly what it's doing. You have to kind of like, of course, you can rip it apart, and I know there's a cargo expand that can kind of expand it for you. But,
Yeah.
like, I literally have no idea what it's doing, and part of me wants to know, but part of me is like, not really want to know because I'm sure it's complicated.
Yeah. It's actually like pretty fun to write these code gen tools. I mean, of course, I'm pretty masochistic person, so of course I'd say that. But I really liked writing my codegen tool, which is for specifically for traits. And there are like a few things I learned while doing it. One, if you so like most of the times Rust documentation about FFI gives examples of passing pointers, but you don't really have to pass pointers. You can pass references or options to a reference because underneath, as in terms of the actual binary code is concerned, it's the same thing. It's an address.
Mhm.
And like when writing FFI, using the borrow checker while writing it makes it super, super easy compared to just working with raw pointers. That's like one of the things I learned. And just like writing the tool with proper type checking built in, assuming both sides are Rust, it makes it really nice. But then you can, of course, once everything's stable, you can drop one side and replace it with C. And so long as C side adheres to the safety contracts of, oh, this pointer must be aligned and initialized, everything works just fine. So that's like one of the things, one of the takeaways from one of my projects was, and which is like why I think like this ABI part is not too important. I've seen people say that, oh, writing C FFI is too complicated. But if you keep using Rust safety, it's not too complicated. But then you're left with the part of, okay, are these two libraries actually compatible at binary level? And that's a big problem, I'd say.
Well, yeah, like you said, you could just use the C ABI for now, right? And just translate it over into what you need.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be honest, it almost makes more sense because if you have a separate ABI just for Rust, people have to kind of, if I understand correctly, right? I'm definitely ABI noob over here. If you create a new ABI just for Rust, that means they would have to learn and create connections to that ABI. No.
Mm.
and it would be different than what we're used to with C or C++, right?
Uh, yeah, in a sense. Although, like, the goal of Interop ABI is to be a superset of CABI, which I very much like,
Hmm.
because that means you can embed C structures inside without worrying about compatibility, because you know if it's an interoperable struct, you know that C structures fit inside and it's very well defined. And it like would add some, I mean, I think it would add. It's just a proposal. It's there's nothing concrete yet, but it would allow to express Rust better in an interoperable way. So you don't really need too much, but those little things help with interoperability story.
Yeah, I didn't know it was gonna be a superset, but that, yeah, I guess that could work. I mean, for me, I just feel like let's just build upon or keep using the C one because that's already defined and everybody's used to it. And like you said, you can already build that connector as it is. I mean, so is CFFI with Rust? Isn't that also is that related to ABIs? Because I feel like it's about the same, no? Because you can call functions, right? With that, like basically, that's is FFI the same as ABI, or they're very related? They have a lot of overlap. Because I'm just trying to wrap my head because you often hear these two together, at least in this podcast.
I think they're like very much related because FFI is foreign function interface. So it's basically you write an endpoint for other languages to call into your language or vice versa, and you need some common way of communicating. So when you write
Hmm.
FFI in Rust, you don't write regular Rust functions, you write say extern C functions, which say, okay,
Hmm.
for this function, I want to use CABI specifically. So they're very much related.
So every time when I use extern C, I'm basically using the C ABI. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I always felt it was a little bit weird. Now, why do I say that? That's because, like, you say extern, okay, that makes sense. It's a keyword. And then you use, I think it's a capital C written with a double quotation. So it seems like you
Yeah,
can replace that with like whatever you want. But I'm only aware of the C one. I don't think there's any others that are supported. Am I wrong?
there is extern system.
Okay. So what exactly is that? Do you know?
I think it's in most cases the same as C, but it could be
Okay.
different on Windows because Windows has a lot of weird calling conventions. It has the standard call, it has vector call, it has fast call, like very many different calling conventions. And I think you can actually define them in Rust as well when you're on a Windows platform. But then Windows has its own specific NT ABI, which I think is roughly the same. I don't know. But in those cases, I guess it's meant, okay, this is for system functions like calling into NTDLL. And there's like a few more extra ABIs. There is C unwind, which I don't know the details of, but I think it allows panicking across that boundary. Then there is, you can also write extern Rust, or is it Rust call, which is basically the same as not having any extern specifier. And I think that's it for now.
Hmm.
I guess an extra thing could be added is the extern interop, which would it change much? I'm not entirely sure, apart from not passing zero sized variables through, but that's about it.
Okay. Wow. I feel like I learned a lot today. Maybe you're like a computer Buddha or something, enlightening me and all this stuff.
I'm very flattered, thank you.
Yeah, I wish I had more time to study more. There's just too many things you can do with Rust or anything in programming that it's hard to. The problem with me is I get distracted by shiny stuff. As I said, I got my Steam Deck. Now I'm busy playing video games. Probably a bad thing to be productive and learn all this other stuff. I can't do it. So, I want to learn everything, but I can't.
Honestly, it sometimes occurs because it's easy to get burnt out when you're super productive. Yeah, I've got a Steam Deck, but I can't get to it. I played Outer Wilds through, and then haven't played anything else.
So, what are you playing right now? You're not playing anything at the moment, right? Is that what you're saying?
Not much. I have a Minecraft server with friends, but whenever I go in, I get distracted with something. Yeah. I have a hard time playing a game for hours, which is weird
Oh, yeah.
because I used to be able to play Counter Strike for entire days.
I've managed to discipline myself, like, I don't have any Windows well, sorry, I don't can't say I don't have any. I have one Windows Surface laptop that's locked in my cabinet just for testing purposes. I have a VM on my desktop. So I kind of taught myself that only play games on the Steam Deck. So I taught myself that basically once the Steam Deck is out of battery, okay, put it down, charge it, and be productive now. That's God's way or whatever way you believe. That's nature's way of saying, okay, time's up, time to get back to work.
That's a really good way to go about it. Changing the
Yeah,
environment is the best way to change.
yeah. I found a way to stop it. Although sometimes I do find a way around that. I just hop into bed and my charger's next to my bed. So then I lay back and keep playing. So
Relatable.
I'm not Superman. I do get distracted with stuff I shouldn't be doing.
Happens.
Getting back to your article, you've mentioned quite a few more libraries over here. CBindGen. I think I've used that one. That one will help generate like the header files, right?
Yeah.
C and C++. ABI stable, I don't know about. Diplomat, I definitely don't know about, but Diplomat sounds interesting. It's also to do with FFI, is that right?
Yeah, I haven't really used it myself, but
Okay.
I've just read onto it as it was in the proposal comments.
And you also have Safer FFI. I haven't heard of this one. I might need to take a look at that one.
That one looks really elegant.
Really? Okay. I always forget which one. Cargo RS, is that right? No, sorry, it's crates.io. I always mess this up. I always go to cargo.rs, which is some company, instead of going to crates when I want to look up a crate. Am I the only one that does this? Sounds
I
like it.
usually do dogs.rs/crate name because it's quicker. You don't need to type in slash crates.
Dogs what?
docs.rs/crate name.
Oh. Oh, okay. That's smart. Okay, maybe I'll try to make this a habit. For me, I always go to cargo.rs because I'm thinking about cargo. It is a little bit weird. It's like cargo, but then it's crates.io. Of course, I know they're called crates and all that stuff, but it's just it takes me a minute to
Mhm.
switch. I only have this problem with Rust. The other languages I don't have a problem, like Pipey, I know for Python, Ruby Gems, Ruby, but that's got Ruby in the name. Straightforward. Elixir's got Hex, same with Erlang. I don't know why I don't get tripped up with that one. They got lots of things, I'm sure.
Yeah, C++ has got GitHub.
Well, everybody's got GitHub. Everything's on GitHub. It's
Yeah.
gone to a point where I think like nowadays, like everybody just points their deps to GitHub nowadays. People don't even release version 1 anymore. They're just like you just point to master and then just let it go.
I have done that, but it's not a good idea.
Depends on the code and the environment, right? Some
Yeah.
languages, like the ones posted on the library page, like, heck, like crates.io, like it may be out of date, it may be broken, but then they have a stable branch usually that works.
Mm.
I don't know if this happens a lot for Rust. Rust usually is pretty good about this kind of stuff, but some other languages, yeah, you just look at the GitHub and usually it's already there. Or they have a branch that they're working on to fix it and it already works and they just haven't published it yet.
Mm.
And then you just see
Yeah.
and then you just see a bunch of people talking about it on the PR. "Please merge this and release. I need this." It's like, just point it to it, man. Just depends on what's going on, but usually I just say, just point it to it if you can.
Mm. That's kind of one of my pet peeves with cargo is some projects are get abandoned and it's like, oh, I found
Mm.
this project and I'd want to contribute, but it's abandoned, so I need to fork it under a different name. And I think there should be some sort of mechanism to transfer ownership of crates.
I think I heard that this problem is supposed to be addressed,
Huh.
like, recently. I could have sworn yeah, here we go, this is 2016. I swear I heard somebody talking about this. I think the Rust Foundation may be looking at handling this problem. I may be wrong.
That
I swear I
that
heard
would
this recently. Maybe I'm going crazy. Have you heard this or no?
I've heard the need of it, but I haven't really heard the details.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I heard that there's some announcement, but I don't see it when I Google search.
Mm.
But yeah, you're not the only one who's complaining. And also the name squatting is really annoying too.
Yeah.
There should be a way to kick people off if possible.
To be fair, I sometimes do that as well. But it's like, oh, it's a project that I'll do in half a year. And oh, this really short name is not taken yet. Let's do it now. But I usually end up actually writing it, so it's good on my end.
Yeah, but people should come out and check your article, right? So it's on your blog. It's Blaze, BLAZ.is.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they have a blog section over here. At the time of this recording, it is your latest blog post. It looks like you don't blog every week. So like, maybe it's like every 6 months or so. So plenty of
It's
time for people to come check it
it's
out.
random. It's
Sporadic.
super random.
Whenever something really grinds your gear, you'll be writing an article, I guess.
Yeah,
So
exactly. That's how we roll.
yeah, a lot of people is like that. So Whenever the next thing makes you angry, you will expect another article, but you'll still be on the top 10 for a while, I'm guessing.
It's not always
Um,
when I'm angry.
when you got something to say, you'll be tapping away at the keyboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it really thought out. I love the graphic that lists everything over here and all the different
Mm.
crates. And yeah, I mean, is there anything from the article that you think that we should really, pay attention to or get out of this besides, of course, what you mentioned earlier?
I don't really think so. I'd say the point I was making is that there are two sides of interoperability, and we should focus on both of them rather than just the API because it won't solve the problems that are wanted to be solved. And that's, I guess, the main point. And the details are in the article. I'm much better at textual communication. So, listener, feel free to read the article.
If people are also getting their gears grinded and want to grind with you and know more about you, how can we best get a hold of you? Do you have some contact information on your website? Maybe is easy for us to get to.
I'm on Discord. Actually joined the Rustacean Station podcast Discord, and there's a GitHub. I have an email. I don't exactly know how people find my email, but some people end up sending me emails, which is pretty cool. And I also have a YouTube channel, but I haven't posted there in ages. But if you really want to get hold of me, Discord or email. Discord is heap0042. If it's not heap, it's H33P. I can just write it down.
Okay, and with that, I think that was an awesome intro into the ABIs. So people are talking about it, but I feel like I'm not part of the cool kids club, so I don't quite understand what is the importance of it. But now I start to get it, especially since I wrote some FFI already.
Mm.
All right, again, thank you for coming on, and I appreciate it. And again, let me know if you have any more interesting articles you're writing. So next thing that grinds your gear, just let me know.
Okay, I will. And once again, thanks for having me on this podcast. I really appreciate that.